Hello, and thanks for joining me for the latest episode of Off the Wall, Arlington Arts Center's video series featuring conversations with our resident artists. My name is Blair Murphy, and I'm the curator at AAC. Off the Wall is just one of the new online programs we've launched to continue connecting the public to contemporary art and contemporary artists while we're not able to welcome people into our galleries and our classrooms. For information about all of our online programs, including workshops, artist talks, and at-home art projects, please go to arlingtonartscenter.org. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook to get updates, and we also are sending a weekly email newsletter with information about all of our new programs. I'm happy to be talking today with Ryan McCoy. Ryan is an artist based in Washington, D.C. and a resident artist at Arlington Arts Center. He works in various media, but his primary body of work developed over the last 15 years includes paintings that combine specific materials, including unconventional materials such as seawater, ash, rust, and baby powder to create iconographies about time, place, and memory. Ryan's work has been exhibited at national and international venues, including Connersmith in Washington, D.C., Latrobe Contemporary in Victoria, Australia, and Grizzly Grizzly in Philadelphia. His paintings are included in numerous private collections throughout the US, Europe, South America, and Australia, and he teaches at George Mason University. If you've been to AAC before, you might remember his solo show in our Wyatt Resident Artist Gallery, which took place in the fall of 2017. And he's actually on the calendar to have his second solo show in the Wyatt Gallery. They'll be coming up this winter, January of 2021. So if everyone gets a chance to come and see Ryan's work in person, thanks again for joining us, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Ryan, hi, how are you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Doing all right. Yeah.
Nice to see you.
It's good to see you too. I miss really seeing everybody in their studios and just around at AAC. It's been nice to be able to keep up with people by doing these videos and having our more informal chats also.
Cool.
We wanted to start off today by giving people kind of an overview of your really major body of work that you've been pursuing for about 15 years now, and the shape that takes, the shape the individual pieces take within the context of this large series. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, as you said, this body of work spans about 15 years. There are about 140 major works and about a couple hundred works that are under 4 feet or so. And they've been about structuring time and place and memory. I use materials that signify particular places or points in time, and I combine them to create these like iconographies about the present. I use materials like seawater and ash and baby powder and rust, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like we see the piece we're looking at now is part of that body of work. So using those materials and from 2010.
Yeah.
And then this is a much earlier work from the early 2000s, but was sort of leads up to this more recent work as far as the way you were thinking about the canvas and the ways of sort of dividing it up. How did this kind of build into the later pieces?
Yeah, this is a good example from early 2000s of sort of how this language of margins and notches developed. It was, I guess, me trying to work out a way of articulating balance or imbalance or harmony or disharmony or intrusions. So yeah, this would be a good example of how that visual language developed. Mm-hmm. And I still use it today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the sort of visual balance of space.
Yeah.
Sort of clean demarcations of various spaces on the canvas.
Yeah.
And we can see that here on this other more recent piece, somewhat more recent piece, down at the bottom, using that kind of, like you say, language of margins and notches to kind of contain this space at the bottom where then you've developed these materials. You've been working, like you said, with these non-traditional materials for a pretty long time at this point. How did you select those specifically, or what was the original impetus to experiment with these, with the pine needles and the ash?
Yeah, the painting you saw was I was doing some paintings in the early 2000s before this body of work, but I was also making a lot of sculpture and more, kind of idea-based work, more conceptual, a lot of ready-mades, things like that. And it just felt, it began to, they were all right, but they began to feel very prescriptive and very didactic. And so I was really influenced by the work of Janine and Tony, the way she structured time and place through material. And I think that, Ankawara was also a big influence. I'd say that the very profound and beautiful way that he structured time. These were, I guess, kind of important influences that led into this work, where I began thinking about, just as an experiment, what would be the 5 most important or significant points or places that I'd like to kind of structure in some paintings. What would that look like? And so, for example, I chose pine needles and pine needle ash. When I was a child, I grew up outside of Chicago, and near this large state park had a huge pine forest, and I used to play in that forest with my mom. We'd camp and run around, and lots of time was spent there in my younger years, before the age of 10. And it was just a time where I felt really connected to nature and really connected to my family. And so my mom used pine needles as tinder for our fires. And so I guess I chose to structure that period of time through the use of that material. Would be kind of one example for you. And yeah, so it began as an experiment, and the process, and I guess it just became more felt, more meaningful than the work I was making before. So it was never intended to be such a long body of work, but yeah, it's like the process of gathering has created this web of new experiences that have kind of deepened my relationship with the materials and the process, and so that's kind of kept it going.
Because now you find yourself needing to go out and seek them so that you can use them for the works, and that's it has created its own experiences. Like you say, you can't just order them on the internet like you would order oil paints or.
Yeah, and if you spend 2 days by yourself in a forest, that's I spend a lot of time like making ash, but also like there are photographs and of the fires, and sound recordings and video recordings that these things end up in installations of other kind in my shows, video installations or things like that.
Yeah, there's a tension in your work too that I always find interesting, in that you've been drawn to these materials because of their personal significance for you, but that's not necessarily something that the viewer necessarily needs to know exactly. You sort of, that's very important for you, but it, for the viewer's experience, isn't always something that needs to be communicated, I think. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. I guess I always say I try to get them to a place where they don't need me anymore. But I do work through this, I guess, this logic through which I work. But in the end, everything I want to say is in the work. And hopefully the conditions are set for the viewer to have their own experience with them.
Yeah. And you also do talk about how they've changed over time, or you're not just thinking about these personal experiences, but you're also creating them and manipulating them in response to other things happening in your life, other things going on in the world.
Yeah, sure.
That's an important aspect. Well,
yeah, definitely. Their tonality is, these take about 4 to 6 weeks to make a major work, and so, naturally the things happening in the world or in my life might influence the tonality of them. Yeah.
And then when you install them as part of exhibitions, like people can see in this image, you've kind of thought about how they exist in space, how you can kind of think of them as these, potentially placing them on the floor, positioning them not necessarily exactly like paintings would be typically positioned. What does that add, I guess, for you to the experience of seeing them?
Well, it allows you to think about, it creates opportunities to think about them in different ways and see them in different ways. I always approach a gallery like to install work with, as the gallery is the piece, the gallery is the poem, and the pieces are the words. Mm-hmm. And so it's more of an intuitive and responsive state that I try to create, and try to simplify out anything that doesn't need to be there. And that, I think it's interesting once you can put one painting on a massive wall, and if it's slightly off center, it kind of activates the entire wall. Mm-hmm. In a different way than if it were just centered, Mm-hmm. And I think putting a painting on the floor in a gallery engages the whole space in a different way than just hanging them on the wall very rhythmically. Mm-hmm. And so I like to play with that. I think a lot about language too, and there's this. I think words are just these kind of approximations of an actual thought or feeling, but there's all this stuff that doesn't make it into the word, right? It's just it's the best we have to describe this thought or feeling. Mm-hmm. And I think there's all this stuff that doesn't make it in the words, and that it's like this space between words, like this. And I think about that, like, you've asked me before about, this tension between them being paintings and being sculptures. And I guess I kind of, I guess that space between is kind of interesting to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you've also talked before about like we see in the images, in this image, the pieces here have that kind of margins and notches happening in a similar way to some of the work we looked at a couple minutes ago. It kind of contains what's happening on the canvas in a way that takes it away from the edges. And I think I'd be curious how that, I don't know, for you, how that engages with this sort of painting versus sculpture tension, I guess, for lack of a better word, or moving it kind of away from the edge, what the significance is of that.
Well, like I said, that language of margins has always been my way of articulating a balance or imbalance, or a disharmony or an intrusion. But from a formal standpoint, I mean, if historically paintings have that kind of like illusion. It's a window. Mm-hmm. And so you wouldn't typically paint the sides of a canvas for that reason. And I think if you do, these margins and notches kind of come from the side. I think that when you do that, you're addressing the thingness of the painting, the object. And I think that it sometimes can engage the space in a different way. So yeah, that's something I feel sometimes the impulse to assert or address in the works, but not in every work.
Another recent piece from 2017, and then also 2017.
Yeah.
And I think were these, so your previous solo show at AAC was in 2017, 2018? I'm trying to remember if these pieces would have been in that.
Yeah, fall of 2017.
Yeah, so if anyone who's watching was at AAC, they may have seen these at that point.
Yeah.
And then this is a kind of working shot of what the process looks like.
Yeah, that's a piece from last fall, commission.
And this work, I don't know, I've seen this work in person before and always really appreciate the kind of way it really feels like this space you could move into almost. You kind of are using landscape, I think in some of the works, using landscape or thinking about landscape in a particular way, or at least that's something it evokes, at least for me. Is that something you're thinking about when you make the pieces in some cases?
Yeah, I would say the early works from the 2005 to maybe 2013 were not completely, but more often responsive to things happening in my life. And I think that after that point, they became more responsive to things happening in the world. So political, social, economic turbulence, things like that. And so, I often, even in their titles, they become more, I address language in a different way in this later works. And then before they were mostly dates. But I think, that piece from 2017, I think it was the last slide. One of the last couple slides, you can see like these, I try to articulate this difficult path out of the situation we're in politically or something like this. So yeah. Harrowed Heath, a heath in is a field of low brush. Harrowed is to disturb. Yeah, same idea, just in a different way.
And this one also is another recent piece.
Yeah, this one's called Storm Flowers, and this one is kind of directly responsive to some of the conditions of some of the detained children, like immigrant children.
You started incorporating the Mylar blankets into a few pieces around this time, I think.
Yeah.
Right when that was a really charged material.
So yeah, things like that. But I try to keep it not overt. Yeah.
And then this work is very recent. So this is something that you've been a new direction you're going in, I think. Some of the same materials, but a different visual feel, a different material feel. What are some of the shifts that are happening with these new pieces?
Yeah, I guess, again, thinking about responding to just observations, contemporaneous things happening in the world. Just this, I guess, had this impulse to explore the sort of poetic gesture of mending divisions. And so this series of called Mend, kind of developed out of that impulse. This one's called Mend 2. These are little kind of studies, they're 14 inches each. And so I'm currently working on some larger ones.
Yeah, these were sort of the beginning to try to experiment and figure out this new approach, and then you'll take it bigger.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's really exciting. I think I saw these at first just a few months ago, as we were starting to talk about your second solo show, which was supposed to take place at AAC. Well, your second solo show at AAC, which was supposed to take place in the spring, and unfortunately had to be postponed since that was supposed to open a few weeks after we closed. But I think the date we're talking about now is winter 2021, so hopefully opening in January of 2021.
Yeah.
So if you're watching out there, you'll be able to come see Ryan's work in person at Arlington Arts Center in January when the show opens. And I'm really excited to see how these move forward and how the larger pieces move forward as you start to work on those.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for talking with us. It's been great to kind of get an overview and then see what you're doing now. I know you've been getting a lot of stuff ready to continue working in the studio and kind of prepare.
Yeah, thank you so much, Blair.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Okay, bye.